Hey everyone, it's Lindsay. Welcome to week 7 of the semester. This week we're talking about love and communication and how does that take shape, and we talk about sort of different sort of sexual relationships. We'll start talking about sexual behaviors and other sort of stuff next week, but for now we're just going to talk about what does a relationship look like? How do we show and express sort of our love and communication and all these different sort of things? So first, when we talk about sort of love, let's separate it from sex. Oftentimes we often think these sort of things come hand in hand, love and sex go together, but really, that's a simple sort of way of thinking of things. Is it possible to love someone and not want to have sex with them? Well, yeah, let's hope so, because we love a lot of people in our lives, but don't want to have sex with all of them because that would be weird and creepy. Also, sex. Do people have sex and not feel in love with someone? Well, yeah, that would explain all of hookup culture and a whole bunch of other sort of things, right? And so love and sex, while oftentimes hand in hand, are actually different things, even though they share a lot of similarities. So let's talk about sort of similarities between love and sex. Both love and sex are characterized by intense, enjoyable feelings, right? We love people because they make us feel good, because they do something sort of for our psyche. Again, whether this love be romantic love or platonic love or familial love, we have some intense, enjoyable feelings when we love somebody, right? Sex, obviously, for most people is really intense and enjoyable. That's why we do it. That's why it's the biggest sort of taboo. It's why we talk so much about it in this class, is because sex is fun and good. Both love and sex involve physiological changes, things that happen to our body when we're experiencing love or when we're experiencing sex, right? When we experience love, we know that the dopamine receptors in our brain are going off because we are in love and that feels good. We know that when we're having sex, our body has different sort of things, right? When we think back to the sexual response cycle. And so we actually have physiological changes, things that happen in our body that we can measure. Both love and sex have a huge cognitive component, right? Meaning stuff is happening in our head. Love and sex don't just happen in our body, even if we're focused on sort of physiological differences. They're actually mostly happening in our brain, right? When we think about how we see somebody, how we understand things, how we experience these things, all those things are happening in your brain, right? You see it, you experience it, and then your brain makes sense of, what is this? Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? Am I feeling loved? Am I feeling appreciated? Does this feel orgasmic? All those different sort of things really is happening all of in our brain, right? We know that love and sex can be expressed in different ways. So as I said, love can be a feeling between friends, can be a feeling between lovers. It could be a feeling between parent and child. It could be between sisters. It could be a lot of different sort of ways. And we express those all differently, right? The way that I treat my wife is very different than the way that I treat my sister. Ew, it would be creepy if it wasn't, right? And so we express it in different ways, even though it's the same sort of love, right? Is one word. Sex as well can be expressed in lots of different ways, right? People have lots of different kinds of sex and are in different moods for sex. Sometimes you're really romantic and you want that connection. Sometimes you're like, I'm really horny and let's just do this sort of thing. How you have sex with somebody that you've maybe only known a little bit of time versus somebody you've lived with for years at a time is going to look really different, right? And so love and sex can both be experienced in a lot of different sort of ways. We know that also for both love and sex, that as deprivation happens, so as you have less love or less sex, the need for it and the desire for it increases, right? We know that this is a part of the physiological sort of condition, that idea that the dopamine receptors are being engaged. When you're deprived of those sort of things, you feel very much in need of them, right? And so that idea of like, oh, I'm love starved or I'm sex starved are very similar, which is oftentimes why people are prone to making decisions that maybe are not in their best interest, but because they feel that deprivation feeling, they want whatever it is that they think that it is that they want. Now, when we think about sort of the differences between love and sex, there are some really important sort of things. Number one, love is crucial for human happiness. Sex is not. What? I know, that's so crazy. But actually, you could go your whole life and not have sex and not die. Right? If you were to go your whole life without love of any sort, actually you would wither and die. We know in terms of effects on the brain from studying orphans and from other sort of things, we know that without tender care and with a lot of neglect, the brain actually withers and dies. And so actually you do need to have love for human happiness. You can survive for quite some time. But you're not going to have a fulfilling, happy life if you don't have love. You can without sex. I know sometimes it feels really hard to believe that, but it's actually quite true. Love is pervasive, right? And so love is something that we can feel without any kind of generalized specificity, right? I love all of my students, even though you're just my students, and even though I may not know you very well, I still have this love for you. It's pervasive. I care about you. I have these sort of things, where sex is much more localized, right? We don't have sex with everybody, generally speaking, right? Because it is much more of a localized sort of thing. We have sex with usually one or a few people that we feel very close to. However, the inverse is sort of true. Love tends to be more selective than sex. When we choose to love somebody, oftentimes we choose it for very specific sort of reasons, whereas we know, and a lot of people have sex with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. They're maybe less selective. Maybe you're just feeling horny and you're out at the bar. Whereas you're not going to just choose to randomly love people at a depth that is actually meaningful. Love without sex is not unusual, and neither is sex without love. However, oftentimes when we think about sex and love, we always think about sort of the comparators. A lot of this is based on sort of older Victorian ideas of what is proper and well. And so we often think, like, oh, well, if you have sex with somebody that you don't love, it's not very good. It's unattached, all these other sort of things. Whereas we tend to think like, well, if you love somebody, then that sex is really good and really special. Yeah, for some people that is true. But oftentimes for people, there are different ways in which we express those sort of things. We can inherently rate things as good or better, depending on a lot of different factors, not just based sort of in love. And so I think it's really important for us to say, yeah, these things can all be sometimes true, but sometimes not, right? We have different degrees of love and expression for different sort of ways in relationships that we have. Right now, there's lots of different theories of love in terms of talking about what are the sort of things that we need to be able to have a lifelong sort of lasting relationship. There's a lot of them in the book that you can read about. My favorite one happens to be Sternberg's triangular theory of love. Sternberg's theory of love looks at different kinds of things within a relationship. So there is intimacy or liking somebody. Like, do you want to spend time? Do you want to connect with somebody? There is commitment. So the sort of, I'm with this person no matter what. Oftentimes we see this in sort of long-term relationships. And then there's that passion part, that part of like, ooh, I'm so infatuated with somebody, and these sort of things. So what Sternberg said is that to have a lifelong lasting relationship, you need to have all three of these things. You need to like the person, you need to be committed to the person, and you need to be passionate about the person, right? And if you have those three things, and you work actively at it, then you are able to create a lifelong lasting love. Now, what he also says is that there are also different degrees to which we feel these sort of things, right? So maybe you're committed to somebody and maybe you really like them, but maybe they're not really that passionate for you, right? When we think about these sort of things, we think of like older relationships, maybe from the 1950s, where people are like, yeah, this person's fine and we get along well. We're committed to each other, but yeah, like they don't really get my motor going, right? Sometimes we have people who are like, wow, I'm really infatuated with this person and I really want to, they get me really excited and I'm committed to them, but sometimes they're kind of jerks and I don't really like them, right? It would be something that we think of as sort of a fastuous love. And we think about people who are maybe, I really like them and I'm passionate, but I'm not really committed to them, right? And we might think of that as some sort of romantic love, and maybe commitment comes with time, and maybe it's not something that ever develops. This is why sometimes relationships can feel good and they still fail, right? Because we need to have all of these different sort of components of love. Now, when we think about sort of what gets us attracted to somebody, that's usually one of the biggest questions I get in terms of my teaching sort of stuff, is what makes people attractive? Well, the good news is very rarely is there a single sort of standard of anything. The bad news is the two things that we do know to hold true across sort of time, place, and manner are youthfulness and health. Right? Most of us can't do a lot about youthfulness because we are our age that we are. And health is somewhat subjective. Yes, we can have some sort of contribution to it, but just in general, as you get older, you get less healthy. And so those are the only two characteristics that hold true across time, place, geography, all different sort of characteristics, right? A lot of these things are biologically driven. We know that sexual attractiveness is a mix between sort of desire, biology, preference, other sort of things. And we know that the biological drive comes out really heavy when it comes to youthfulness and health, right? Most of us, our bodies are trying to create babies, even if we don't actually want them. And your body wants to create babies with people who are young and healthy, right? Not a surprise there. But every other sort of thing, sort of body type, what people look like, what facial features they have, color of hair, eyes, all that sort of stuff is really open to sort of individual preference. When we think about these sort of things, we have to just really think about the differences in terms of time and place. In some cultures, bigger bodies are found to be more sexy. In some cultures, very thin bodies are thought to be sexy. In some cultures, dark hair is a preference. In other cultures, blonde hair is a preference, right? All of those sort of things are things that change with time and space. Another sort of important concept to think about is the halo effect. The halo effect is this idea that we use traits that are of one sort, and then we infer other sort of traits on other sort of things. In contemporary US culture, we tend to do this with beauty and with body size. We tend to think people who are pretty and are sort of in a standard typical sort of American body size, we see them as smarter, more capable, these sort of things, even though those don't really have anything to do with each other. And so it's just really important to keep these sort of implicit biases in check when we're meeting people, when we're navigating sort of the world of, is this something that actually is an attribute of them, or is it something that I've assigned because of these societal messages about what sort of bodies or characteristics that they have? Right? If we look back sort of through time and we look and see what do people find most attractive in a partner, we see that both men and women value the same sort of things. Mutual attraction and love, dependable character, emotional maturity, stability, and a pleasing disposition, right? You want to like the person that you're hanging out with for possibly forever. You want to feel some sort of love feeling for them. Although if we look sort of at love over time, the idea of love has changed over time. It used to be assumed that if you matched well with somebody, both came from good families, you had sort of a good match on all the other sort of qualities, love would come, right? But now we know that love is probably one of the more important things, right? You're not going to marry somebody or find a partnership with somebody if you don't love them, right? And so we can see these sort of things. And if you look at sort of evidence and data, we know that although good looks are usually one of the things that we think most about, it's actually much lower on the scale than anything else in terms of what we desire in partnerships. In terms of thinking about types of relationships, there's several. Number one, and I always like to emphasize, is your individual self. You should have a good relationship with yourself. Most of your life will flow from yourself. You are going to be the only constant in that. And so we should work very hard on developing our relationship with ourself, whether that is a physical sort of relationship with ourself, whether it be an emotional relationship with ourself, or even it's just sort of our sense of who we are in the world, something that's really important. And so that's why I talk a lot about sort of self-love in my classes. Also, your relationship with self will have a lot to do with how you navigate sort of the dating and social world. If you feel good about yourself, well, then you're going to be able to demand more in relationships and not take kind of crappy relationships because you feel good about yourself. Oftentimes when we think about sort of relationships, we think of the standard sort of two, the dyadic relationship. So man and man and man, woman and woman, et cetera, two people involved in a relationship. Most of the time we think of this in monogamous sort of relationships, but we also know that with monogamous relationships comes cheating and infidelity and all these sort of things. And so the videos this week are going to talk a lot about what are the ways in which we navigate sort of the world of monogamy, what's good about it, what's bad about it, what's hard about it, what's easy about it. There's lots of videos this week for you to be able to think through those different sort of things of how do we have better and healthier realistic expectations of monogamy if that is what we choose to do. Then the next sort of set of videos talks about what is beyond monogamy, right? We often think of polygamy, which is one man and many women, but instead I want you to think much more about polyamory. Polyamory means many loves. This means relationships of more than two people. It could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 27. People who are involved in polyamorous relationships have lots of different ways that they navigate these relationships. And there's some videos this week that talk about what is polyamory, what does a polyamorous relationship look like, and then what are sort of the in-between waypoints between sort of monogamy and polyamory. There's a lot of ways that people have tried to navigate sort of open relationships, or monogamish is a new sort of term. And so a lot of the videos this week talk about those sort of things. All right. I will see you next week, and have a great week.